loud? Okay. I think the recording button, and we're just letting everybody know that we are recording tonight. If there are any issues, anyone has any issues with that, please email us. It usually doesn't record names on the screen, so nobody would be identified that way.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you all for being here. We always start our meetings by acknowledging that Greensboro, North Carolina, the city in which we usually hold our face-to-face Common Threads meeting, is located on the stolen land of indigenous people and more. My name is Yacine Kout. I am the co-facilitator of Common Threads. I'm a partner in this endeavor, Dr. Chuck Egerton. Our Common Threads meetings usually take place as a discussion. Occasionally, we also host more conventional sessions with an expert on a specific topic, which touches on themes usually tackled through Common Threads, such as race, class, gender, or sexuality. Tonight, we are having such an expert talk. Our co-facilitator, Dr. Chuck Egerton, will share his research with us. Chuck has many hats. In addition to being one of my great friends, he's also a photographer, a teacher, and an author. Tonight, his research sort of blends all of his hats together. He will be presenting us his work on gender and race in a talk entitled Being and Becoming, a New Understanding of Peaceful Masculinity in the Intersection of Whiteness and Patriarchy. His talk will last for about an hour. Be mindful that during his talk, Chuck may ask participants to read a few quotes throughout his presentation. I will ask of everybody to please mute yourselves, but of course, when you're ready to speak, when you're ready to read a quote, to unmute yourselves. After the talk, we will have some time for discussion for about 20 minutes or so, maybe longer, depending on how things go. But again, I would like for everybody to know that we are very thankful and grateful that you are here sharing your time with us. Appreciate you being here.
Yes, likewise, I thank you. I thank you, Yacine, for being the MC for tonight. And just one more word about Common Threads. This is an ongoing discussion for the last 30 years. Began at Randolph Community College. Iris is on here tonight. She was a colleague from Randolph Community College, remembers Common Threads. And here it is, 30 years yet later, we're still doing it. So great to have you here. And of course, it's taken on a little bit of a different form here being on Zoom. Yeah, but so glad to have you here. So I'm going to share the screen, and sure I've got everything right here. Here we go. Can everybody see that? I can only see. Okay. Thank you, Iris. So I'm going to be presenting about my doctoral thesis, but adding some new considerations about patriarchy and whiteness. Now, I know some of the folks that are here tonight were participants in my study. A couple of the men, Abbas and Jim, and if Krishna comes on, he's another man that participated. There were 11 of us, including me, a couple of years ago, doing this research with Baha'i Men in Winnipeg. And I'll get more into the meat of the research itself, which I think it's pretty interesting because I use an arts-based method. I am a photographer, as Yacine said, and I used photography and portraiture as a way for men to look deeply into themselves, to kind of use their portraits as a mirror to delve deep into who they are as men and to think about their role as men. This is with a group of Baha'i men who hold as one of their sacred tenets the equality of women and men. So I was curious about how that was going, how these men were living that sacred principle, how it was playing out in their lives and in their families and communities. So we had long interviews and portraits, and you'll get to see those as we go through quickly through the whole process. But I wanted to start out a little bit by talking about where I stand right now, and I stand at the crossroads of white and male supremacy. As a white man, I stand at that crossroads, and I think particularly because the country and the world is really in a kind of a reawakening awareness of the racism that we suffer from all across the world, particularly the anti-Black racism that we suffer from. I wanted to intersect that with this study, which primarily looks at male supremacy and patriarchy. So what I wanted to be clear about is that that really both patriarchy and both forms of supremacy, both male and white supremacy, are performances. They're things that we learn. We're not really born with these qualities. They're things that we acquire and are conditioned with, and they're described as performances, meaning that we're kind of like actors in a play, and without waking up to the play and realizing that we've been given a script, we continue to act out the script that we've been given. And so that's why I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit tonight. And so first I wanted to talk about patriarchy and male supremacy. And it's different than whiteness in the sense that sex is really biological. It has have to do with our bodies. And what the bodies that we're born into, the white bodies or the male bodies that we're born into. And I'll just read here, patriarchy exists under the umbrella of the greater ideological, political, and emotional system of white supremacy, of male supremacy, excuse me. Patriarchy as a male pyramid of graded subordinations and exploitations specifies women's oppression in terms of class, race, country, or religion of the men to whom we belong, talking about women. Male supremacy imposes men's will on women and other men who do not conform to it. And that's kind of the aspect of policing that goes on both in terms of race and in terms of gender. So as far as white supremacy go, I would say the disease itself is white supremacy, and then the symptoms of the disease are patriarchy, misogyny, sexism, and paternalism. So the overarching disease here on both sides of this this kind of two-sided coin of male and white supremacy is that the disease is the supremacy, and that the symptoms of the disease are patriarchy, misogyny, sexism, and paternalism. And this is a socially constructed disease that we suffer from, and it's learned and assimilated into men. I was reading something recently that talking about whiteness, that it's almost as though we are impregnated with whiteness. It's so deeply embedded into us as white people, and which describes some of the difficulty in removing these negative qualities, because it's not all negative, but to remove the ones that are causing us from having justice and equality in the world. Now, let me see. Could I ask, Sarah, would you read this quote for me? Can you unmute yourself?
Sure.
Thank
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Awesome. Until we can collectively acknowledge the damage patriarchy causes and the suffering it creates, we cannot address male pain. We cannot demand for men the right to be whole, to be givers and sustainers of life. They are imprisoned by a system that undermines their mental health.
Thank you, Sarah. Bell Hooks has a book called The Will to Change, which is highly recommended. I used it a lot in my thesis, and she talks a lot from a very compassionate perspective about how we as men have been really sold a bill of goods. We've really been kind of conditioned into a place where it is damaging to us to believe in these aspects of supremacy, and that it affects us mentally and spiritually. These are some aspects of how these negative effects of unearned privilege, or what we could say are patriarchy, affect men. And I don't think I'll go about reading all of them. That give you a moment to kind of read through some of them. These might seem familiar to you. One of the big ones is the fear of the feminine, fear of femininity and homophobia. Another is an absence of accountability, the need to be in charge and control. So these are just some aspects of the negative effects of patriarchy and male supremacy on men. So before I move on from that, it's what's interesting, and what's something I've found in this work is that just becoming aware of the qualities within us of male supremacy and patriarchy can be a very painful process. It's I'm in the midst of it myself. I would say, as I speak to you, I am certainly not a whole human being. I suffer from racism. I suffer from sexism and misogyny. Those have been deeply embedded in me, and it's a constant process, constant effort in working with, especially with others who, in partnership and in intimate relationships, where I can kind of uncover these qualities within myself and work on removing them, kind of weeding them out, and then cultivating the more compassionate and empathetic qualities. So that's a little segment on patriarchy and male supremacy, and then here just the corresponding little piece on whiteness and white supremacy. Now, race is not biological. I think we know that it's not based in science, and that race is really a myth, the concept of race. White supremacy is ideological, political, and emotional system that indoctrinates, surveils, guards, and perpetuates whiteness to instill anti-blackness in white bodies. And you'll hear me kind of use this term white bodies. I've been reading this book. Gregory is also in this reading group, My Grandmother's Hands, which talks a lot about this concept of, I was born into a white body. I really had no choice in that matter. None of us really have any choice into what body we're born, but it's what we do with it after that. So the problem is not having a white body or a light-skinned body. The problem is allowing my white body to be indoctrinated by whiteness, this kind of false doctrine that's basically a lie of superiority. Just skipping down here a little bit, white supremacy is the overarching disease. Racism and racial prejudice are symptoms of the disease of white supremacy. Prejudice, which we know that everyone can have, regardless of skin color or ethnicity, is an individual's emotional commitment to willful ignorance. And the formula is that prejudice plus power equals racism. So there has to be an element of power. And I think that's why the term supremacy is just so appropriate for both white and male supremacy, because it is about power. And whiteness is also a false social construction that needs to be eliminated. So I kind of see myself in the task as a white person of eliminating the control that whiteness has over me, and finding my true and genuine authentic humanity, which is not described by the doctrine and ideology of whiteness. James Baldwin is just amazing. I was just reading Fire Next Time, and it's, I look back through it, I think I've underlined just about every word in there. As you go through, I highly recommend that if you haven't read it. But ignorance allied with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have. And I think we can see how that applies in so many different ways, but especially to racism and white supremacy. Now, related to this idea of leaving whiteness, Maggie, would you be kind enough to read this slide, and then there's another one right after it?
Sure, both of them.
Yeah, I'll switch to the next slide once you read this one.
The authors reimagine a different set of norms and values through a critical humanizing pedagogy of love, one that can only be realized when whites learn to love whiteness to death. That is, whites need to find not just the political will, but also the emotional strength, vulnerability, necessary to eliminate the white race as a socio-political form of human organization and free themselves and others from the shackles of the institution of race.
Okay, it's the next slide.
If treason to whiteness really is loyalty to humanity, then the greatest act of love whites can show humanity is to end whiteness itself, to love so much as to send whiteness to its grave. This is no utopia, since whiteness is a modern human creation. That is, there was a time before whiteness. As such, there can be a time after whiteness, for which we can choose to demolish whatever we have built.
Thank you, Maggie. Those are two pretty potent quotations. And if anyone wants any of these references later, please email me and I can send those to you. But this really, to me, carries forward this idea of how whiteness is really not authentic as part of us and that we really need to eliminate it altogether. So this is one of my paintings, which I like to show because it illustrates how I feel broken. And I think so many of us are not in states of perfection, where there are parts of us that are broken, that have been hurt, that have been damaged for various things. I think the damage to me is whiteness and male supremacy that have indoctrinated me in so many ways. And so I stand in a place of vulnerability. And one of the difficulties about talking about this as a white man is not to center myself in the discussion. I mean, it really is not so much about me because I am in the class that oppresses people. I'm in the class that is the oppressor, the colonizer. And but I think it's important to put light on what we as people who have been the colonizers and the oppressors need to do about that, to free ourselves from those roles and to really work in partnership with women and people of color, women, people who've been oppressed, to work together to free ourselves as well as others from these false doctrines. Okay, so that's what I just said, basically. Okay. So if you're still with me, I hope everybody's okay at this point. I'm going to launch into telling you a little bit more about the study that I did with these wonderful men in Winnipeg, and what it all leads to is, with research, the purpose of it is to come to findings. There are, for me to have fulfilled my PhD, I had to have findings from my research. And in arts-based research, many times the finding is the art itself. It's the work that the men did. And this study did require the men to work with me as kind of co-artists and co-researchers in discovering ourselves and trying to learn more about ourselves and looking deeply within our own selves. So this was the University of Manitoba. I won't really go into all that there. Okay, can I ask for a volunteer to read this slide? Someone wants to unmute themselves and read that.
Cultures of peace. A peace culture is a culture that promotes peaceable diversity. Such a culture includes life ways, patterns of belief, values, behaviors, and accompanying institutional arrangements that promote mutual caring and well-being, as well as an
The Electoral
equality
College,
that includes
representing the certified winner,
difference,
cast their votes for presidential and vice president of the United States.
Is
equitable.
that your background, Kathy?
No.
The nation itself.
Oh, somebody else, could they mute themselves, please? We're hearing about the Electoral College.
Our Constitution and the will of the people.
Could you mute yourself, please?
Our democracy
Thank you.
pushed, tested,
Oh,
threatened.
I don't know if you can see who that is, Yacine.
True and strong.
D, maybe D. No.
Electoral College votes.
The host should be able to mute everybody.
Even in the face of the public health.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and
People
I'll
voted.
see if I can do that.
Voted record numbers.
Harvey.
More Americans voted this year than have ever voted in the history of the United States of America. Over 100.
Okay.
Okay, I'll just start somewhere in the middle there. Well, that's a big long sentence. Okay. Such a culture includes lifeways, patterns of belief, values, behaviors, and accompanying institutional arrangements that promote mutual caring and well-being, as well as an equality that includes appreciation of difference, stewardship, and equitable sharing of the Earth's resources among its members and with all living beings.
Okay, thank you. This is, can everybody hear me now? Is that, okay, thank you, Kathy, for reading that. This is from Elise Boulding, and I really highly recommend her work. She's done a lot on feminism and peace building. And she also worked closely with the United Nations and UNESCO, because the concept of cultures of peace is a UN concept, the idea of building cultures of peace, and in defining what those would be. And in the title of my thesis, it is, a photographic inquiry with Baha'i men into cultures of peace. I wanted to define what a culture of peace is, at least in the terms in peace and conflict studies, which is my field. So the study was really about identity, searching identity, and looking for meaning in our lives. We also used this particular quotation from the Baha'i writings because all of the participants were Baha'i men. And we started our interviews reading this particular passage. And Abbas, can you hear me? Would you like to read this for us? You can unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you, Abbas.
O son of spirits, bring thyself to account each day, ere thou art summoned to a reckoning for death, and heralded shall come upon thee, and thou shalt be called to give account for your deeds. Baha'u'llah, the hidden words.
Thank you, Abbas. Thank you. And this is, I know that we have a very multi-faith and no faith participation tonight. So this is not trying to ask anyone to have to believe in life after death. But these were Baha'i men, and this was really important for us about dealing with accountability. Bringing yourself to account each day. And I think as men in particular, and as white, for those of us who are white men in this study, I think it's very, very important. And I think it's important for everybody to think about taking account each day. So we use this passage as one of the focuses of the group. It's also about transformation. This is a butterfly from my wife's garden, my wife Dawn. I don't know if she's on here now. There was another Zoom meeting that she was at tonight. So I wanted to just make clear too that this study was an arts-based thesis in progress, a snapshot of research unvarnished, evolving, and emerging. It is a workshop, not an art gallery, offering a glimpse into the unfinished struggle for gender equality in the present moment. So we realized that whatever work we produced at this point by the men in the study was meant to be a workshop, not meant to be, showing off and trying to have some kind of semblance of goodness and not kind of virtue signaling ourselves, but was really about showing a work in progress. And there is an exhibit as a part of the study. So we also used, and what inspired me for the study was some passages from this statement by the Baha'i International Community, which was written to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women at the point of the 20th anniversary of the Conference on Women. And the quotation that really stuck out to me was this one. And could I ask a man to read that for us, a volunteer? Unmute yourself. And
men must come to realize that under current conditions of inequality, the development of their full potential is not possible. It is they who must find the moral courage to convey and model new understandings of masculinity, and who must challenge and question the narrow roles that society and the media have assigned to them.
Thank you, Derek. I would recommend that's available online also if you want to read the whole. It's a short little statement, but there are many other really good quotes from that. But this particularly interested me because it says, it is up to men to find the moral courage to model new understandings of masculinity. So the question to me was, well, what are those new understandings? And that was a part of the research question. And then they also not just understand masculinity, but must challenge and question the narrow roles that society and the media have assigned to them. And that's about social conditioning, and that's about how the media kind of polices us and tells us how we should be as men, and resisting that. So I found that to be quite interesting. So I used the term guy wires, which was, I guess, a bit of a pun because this was about men. But guy wires are those wires that hold, a balloon in the air, or towers. There's those lines that go down to the ground and kind of give it support. And for me, the three guy wires were sacred relationships, the magic mirror, which is about photography, using the visual nonverbal aspect of photography. And then habitus, which is a concept that comes from Pierre Bourdieu, the sociologist, who talks about the idea that we kind of put on and off different aspects of ourselves like clothing, kind of like a habit. Sacred relationships goes back to me to the indigenous concept that we are related to everything. Everything is related to each other, and we need to have respect for all of those things. And of course, the Baha'i concept of the oneness of humanity. So my research questions were, how do these men experience their own masculinities? What are their stories of masculine self-identity and performance? How do they experience their masculinities on the social level, in their upbringing, family life, and in community with other men and women? And for example, one of the interview questions I asked the men was, when did you first realize that you were a boy? When was that first realization that you were a boy and somehow being a boy was different? And I got lots of really interesting answers from that. How do men negotiate their masculine performance in a context of a belief in the equality of the sexes? If these men are performing a new understanding of masculinity, how is it evident in practice? And what are those stories? So a lot of my thesis is there are 10 stories, and they're each about 10 pages long, which are from the interviews, and they're stories that the men told in response to my questions. The other part of this is, how are they resisting or negotiating with negative cultural norms of masculinity? Because resistance is really a key here, and not just passively going along with what is. Then the last part is there any evidence of transformation from hyper toxic and hegemonic masculinities into masculinities that nurture the construction of cultures of peace? Bell Hooks said that these negative masculinities, she called them patriarchal masculinities, and then she called the masculinities that would foster cultures of peace, she called them feminist masculinities. So it's kind of an interesting idea. And the concept here is there are many kinds of masculinity, and I think the men here in the room tonight could testify to this, that we different times and in different places, we can turn on different kinds of masculinity if we're in a situation that we perceive as dangerous, or where we need to be show strength. We have a kind of a masculinity that we can perform. When we want to be soft and peaceful, we have another masculinity that we can perform. So there are many different ways and aspects of the performance of our masculinity, which to me tells us that it's flexible and plastic, and we have the opportunity for transformation. These are not locked in and fixed. So I used a technique called photosophia, which is something that I devised. And photosophia means light and wisdom. And it's a photo elicitation method, which I described a bit before, where the men are photographed and they're asked questions as they're looking at their own portrait. Photosophia really has six different practices, and I'm not going to give you a quiz at the end of this, so don't worry. It starts here at about the 11 o'clock area on this camera aperture with the interview. Photosophia is the point where they're looking at their own portrait. We did group study, group discussion. The men inscribed their portraits. They created their own photographs, which is photo voice. And then we had an exhibit at the end of their work. And I'll show you, I will kind of walk you through these different aspects. So this is photosophia. This is my friend Rod Sasaki, who's in his interview. I'm photographing him, and I'm tethered to the computer so he can see the photographs as I take them. And we went through I took as many portraits as we needed to. He then chose one that I would keep up on the screen that he liked. And that would later be printed onto paper for him to inscribe. But he would look at that picture as I asked him questions. For instance, the question about when did you first realize you were a boy? Now, in this process, after I had done all 10 of the men with photosophia, Abbas said to me, and here he is taking my picture in his apartment. Abbas said one time when we were having tea, Chuck, when is someone going to take your portrait? And I said, well, I'd thought about this, but nobody had asked, or I didn't know how to do it. And he said, I'll take your portrait. So he was a wonderful photographer. You can see he turned his cap around backwards, and he took a lot of pictures. And I'm sure you remember that day, Abbas. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And oops, I'm going backwards. So I wanted to show you, after the picture was taken, this was the picture we chose, or I chose. And you can see that it was printed on 16 by 20 inch paper with a large border around it. And this border was for inscription. And so I gave each one of the men this portrait with the space around it in a big cardboard envelope, and they took them home for a week or two to do these inscriptions by themselves. And I said, as you do this, think about maybe the left side could be being. Who am I today on the left side? Who am I as a man today? And becoming could be on the right side. Who do I want to become? What do I need to acquire? Like, what do I need to weed out? What do I need to cultivate in terms of my qualities as a man? I think you can see how this could also be important in terms of whiteness. And I'm actually thinking about doing a project where we would kind of do this with more of a focus on whiteness, which I think could be really powerful using this method. What I want to show you now is this is a time lapse of me doing my own inscription. Now, I was obviously, as the researcher, I had a lot of stuff with me, and I was kind of prepared. I'm an artist as well, and so I really got into painting and collage and adding things to my portrait as I went. And of course, this was a very private process. The men did this, I think, all of them in privacy, without anyone there as they were working on it. And I think that's really the way it had to be. So this was my final portrait. And one of the things I did in here is, I don't know if you can see these lines, I put a little line in here, my mother's eyes. And I put another line down here, my father's eyebrows. So I've inherited my father's eyebrows. But some of the things I wrote on this left side was, things about anger. I wrote anger in red pen. Just, that I think one of the emotions that men express most easily is anger. But it's a bundle of different feelings that come through as anger, because we don't always feel the freedom to express other feelings. But I wrote about my white privilege actually over here. I'm trying to read selfishness. I wrote just really trying to lay out how I felt the qualities I needed to eliminate. And then over here, I wrote things that I really wanted to kind of incorporate or grow, to be more compassionate and to be more of a genuine human being. This little picture in the lower right is a portrait from, I did a test run of Photosophia, which is in my thesis, kind of what happened. I was testing it. I was the guinea pig. And that's what that little portrait is from. By the way, we didn't really say this, but there will be a time for questions at the end. So I know that some of you are sure they having questions. This was one of the things I wrote in here, which is a haiku. I wrote, to seek my true self is to acquire a taste for ambiguity. Now I'm going to kind of go through the 10 men. So just show you their Photosophia portraits and their inscriptions. So Abbas here, and he's an artist. He's a wonderful artist. If you see the picture on the right, in the background, the large painting above his head is one of his wonderful paintings. He's devoted so much of his work as an artist to the elevation of women in his work. And you can see, the winged figure in the center with the male and female symbols next to it. And in this case, for a couple of the men, we chose to do a diptych, or two portraits. So the close-up of Abbas, and then him working in his environment, in his background. And Abbas, can I ask you to read this again, since we have the blessing of you being here? You don't have to read the 81-year-old part, because I think you're older than 81 now.
I'm 83 now.
He's 83 now. Okay. Could you read the other part that you wrote, or that you said in your interview?
I just want my children, when they become as old as I am, to know that I never gave up. I'm still facing the obstacles of life. I'm still dealing with life as it is. I want them to know that their father is a good worker, still in the workshop, still working, and I hope I keep working until I am well deserving to go to the next world. And I'm still working.
Thank you, Abbas. It's such a wonderful thing to have you read that for it's taking me back. Thank you so much. And I don't know if any of the other men have gotten on, because I can't see the faces. But if you are here and I come up to your portrait, let me know you're here so you can read some of the things for me. Now, Rod Sasaki, I don't know if Rod is here. Rod is, and to go back to Abbas is from Egypt. He grew up in a Coptic Christian family that became Baha'is. His father, I believe, was the first generation to become Baha'is. So, thinking about the religious and ethnic diversity in this group is amazing. A lot of the stories that Abbas told me about were from his growing up in Egypt.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was wonderful to read. And now Rod is Japanese Canadian. Rod's family came to British Columbia from Japan. His parents met in Manitoba during World War II, and some of you may not know, but Canada also practiced the internment of Japanese people, just like the U.S. did. They during World War II, after Pearl Harbor, they interred Japanese people in prison camps, and people call them worse than that. They were really terrible spaces, but there was an option to go work on farms in the center of Canada. And so Rod's parents both worked on a farm and met in Manitoba, and that's where they were married, and Rod was born there in Manitoba. So it's got a really interesting background. And Rod wrote, lurking behind a pragmatic front is an inner child ready to play, an impression of quiet longing, adrift on a sea of unrequited ideals. There was a lot of vulnerability. I'm not showing a lot of the other pictures that men put up with this one, but Rod put some pictures of him as he looked in the morning in the mirror with his hair all messed up, and which was pretty amazing to see in the exhibit. Okay, moving on. Corey Bighorn is Cree from the Bloodvein Nation in Manitoba, and Corey is probably one of the two youngest men in the group. There were two 25-year-old men in the group. Corey's was a lot of the interesting things that he wrote. I think you can probably read some of the inscriptions that he put around himself. You know, tough as the bark of a tree, fragile as a leaf. I put up walls. It's a shame that we don't think about how hard they'll be to take down later. So it was there's a lot of vulnerability in the things that he wrote. And one of the really striking things that he wrote on here was being a boy was hard, being a man is harder. Now, the next person was Jean Michel, who was French Canadian. He's first generation Canadian. His parents were from France, and one of the complaints he had about his parents was that his father didn't understand hockey, which really made it difficult for him as a young boy in Canada, because hockey was so important. A lot of stories that came up in these interviews about the difficulties some of these men have faced, some of the shaming from parents, some of the fights that boys have growing up, just real difficulties. And I'll just let you all read this from Jean Michel. I hope everybody's doing okay. Moving along here. We're getting near the end here. There's Jim Martin, and it was wonderful to have two pictures of Jim. One with his really excellent motorcycle that he promises he's going to drive down here to North Carolina at some point. I hope he does. Jim, you're still on, right? Well, he was on earlier anyway.
Yeah, I'm on.
Oh, you're still on. There you go. There you go. I think, Jim, you wrote this passage here. Would you mind reading this again for us?
You put the clay on the wheel and start molding it. They start off with a few, the fear trip. If we don't go with it, what are we supposed to believe? Inquiries, self-esteem issues beat up by the system. You become cynical as a result. If I hadn't found Baha'i faith, I would be there too.
Thank you, Jim. It's a wonderful blessing to have you here tonight. Jim told a story. Yeah, Jim told a story, and you can correct me on this if you want. He, as I think it was kindergarten or first grade, really a young time in school, where they had these. They always had fake kitchens, for kids to play in. And Jim's relatives ran a little restaurant, and he loved cooking, and he still loves cooking. He's an amazing cook. He can cook for hundreds of people, and I hope one day he'll be able to do that again once COVID is over. But he got all the boys together around this fake stove, and he was like flipping burgers and doing short orders for these guys. And the teacher, the female teacher, came over and immediately started to question his sexuality, question his this is a girl's toy. Why are these boys hanging around this stove and cooking? And they gave him a hard time about it. And he finally had to explain, that I go after school, I go to my relative's restaurant, and that this is what I love. And they finally let him go. But it was kind of like there was this policing of his masculinity there, the fact that he was cooking. I hope I got that right, Jim.
Yeah, it was my granddad's and
Your
grandma's
granddad's.
lunch counter there.
Yeah. But that's, and I thank you so much for that story, because that was really, gives us an idea of what happens as we're young boys and as we get indoctrinated into what is expected of us to be as boys. And of course that changes by generation, but I think a lot of that can still go on. But thank you for that, Jim. Now, Jordan Bighorn is, I don't think Jordan is on. Is he on?
No.
Okay. Jordan is Lakota. And as you can tell by his last name, that his relatives go back to Little Bighorn in South Dakota. And he's a wonderful person, and we've been keeping up since I left Canada. And he had a very cryptic kind of inscription that he did numbers, and at the exhibit he was asked a lot of questions about what all these numbers meant and what he was trying to say by them. But his interviews were very deep. One of the pictures that he showed was a picture, I think, of his grandfather, and he wrote captions for these pictures, and one of them was he's talked about how his grandfather taught him how to die. He remembers that he had his hand on his chest to feel his last heartbeat when he died. So just some really powerful and intimate things were conveyed in these interviews. And the quote that I have from him.
Jacques, he was also very talented. He's very talented in so many ways.
Oh yes, he's a filmmaker. He's amazing. Amazing.
Chance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, he chants in Farsi, doesn't he?
Yeah. Miracle.
Yeah, he's amazing. He's amazing. Yeah, and the one little quote that I pulled out from his was confessing helplessness. Krishna, did Krishna come on?
No, I don't think.
Okay.
He was trying.
Krishna's okay. Well, I'm sorry that he couldn't make it. Krishna is from Nepal and had not been in Canada very long, but I loved how these men inscribed. You see how he wrote sideways and kind of as he wanted to. A lot of the things that Krishna wrote here were like letters to his mother, were comments to his mother and his love for his mother, which I thought was so powerful. He was really a wonderful soul, and he put in his interview, he quoted from Shelley, the poet, as thus with thee in prayer in my sore need, oh, lift me as a wave, a leaf, a cloud, I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed. And, it made me think, that this line really is kind of about vulnerability, which is one of the big findings from the study. Miles Thompson is here, and Miles Miles is a trumpet player, wonderful musician, and he had a lot to say here. And I think I'll let you read this little passage that he wrote. He was another one of the younger men in the study, 25. But with Miles, one of the things we talked about was the hypersexualization of women, and how young men have to deal with the issues of the hypersexualization of women in media, in pornography, and all of these issues that young men face and have to navigate. And that was a pretty interesting thing. Even we talked about gaming quite a bit. Yacine is someone who knows a lot about gaming as well. And now Payam is Iranian. Now, back to Krishna. Krishna was from Hindu roots. Payam is Baha'i, but from Jewish roots. His family goes back to the early Jewish communities in Iran, of which there still are some. And he's an engineer, and he really balked at when I asked him, you can draw, you can paint, you can do whatever you want around your portrait. And he said, I'm not an artist, I'm an engineer. He kind of teased me. And then look at what he did. He did these beautiful drawings around himself. The one on the left, it says, O son of spirit, burst thy cage asunder. And he shows a cage with a bird flying out. And then what's falling out of the cage, as though it's the remnants of the bird, toxic masculinity, inhumanity, injustice, inequity, cruelty, and unfairness. So it's really, really beautiful stuff. And while I was in the interview with Payam, he reminded me of this particular passage. True loss is for him whose days have been spent in utter ignorance of his self. And he brought that up because really he realized that what this study was about was not to be ignorant of ourselves, and that not to have that true loss, but to really know who we are, who we really are, and to strip away the conditioning that society has put on us. And this is Rayon. He's now married to my good friend Angeline. That happened in the last couple of years. He was from the United Arab Emirates, and his family is originally from Iran, and they are Zoroastrians. Zoroastrianism is the kind of the indigenous faith of Iran. So just think about the religious diversity of this just sampling of Baha'is in Winnipeg. It's pretty amazing. And the Quran mentions Zoroaster as a prophet. The Baha'i faith recognized Zoroaster as a prophet also. And he had some beautiful things to say. Now, one of the things he said, I asked him, I said, Rayan, what is the source of this competitiveness? Because we were talking about how competitive men can be. And is it seeking approval? And he answered with one word: insecurities. He said, what are they seeking approval for? Everyone has insecurities. No one is perfect. It's a cover we put on as men saying that we are not insecure. And another example of kind of showing the vulnerability. So this was our exhibit at the University of Manitoba back in 2018. It was only up for 1 week. And during that week, I solicited questionnaires, anonymous questionnaires from people that came, and I got 44 questionnaires. This is the opening night. We had, I think, 70 people there. It was a wonderful gathering, a lot of family and friends, and a lot to read. And as you can see, below the Photo Sophia portraits at the top, you can see that there are other photographs that they also included. Okay, I'm moving along here. Parisa, would you read this for me? Are you still there, Parisa?
Yep, I'm here.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Every new portrait and the words, images displayed made me think of a man I wish I could see. A man I wished could see this. This openness and vulnerability is not often made public, and I wish it was. A woman standing next to me said, I wish my sons to write these words at one portrait.
Could you read this one also? This is the second part of it.
We all wish for the men in our lives to be able to open up like this, and despair for those ones so enslaved by toxic masculinity that they simply cannot or are unable to feel and express themselves with any degree of vulnerability. There is so much to unpack at this exhibit. I will be coming back.
Thank you, Par, for reading that. And this is just one example of the responses in the questionnaires, which were really helpful to me. So I came up with 6 findings, and as you look at these findings, I want you to take a look as they're related to a new understanding of masculinity, but also see if you can relate any of these to kind of the idea of leaving whiteness and patriarchy behind. Do these findings, would they also relate to the issues of whiteness, as we talk about with white supremacy? So my first finding was really the new methodology of photosophia, which I found to be extremely helpful in helping the men delve into themselves and really contemplate their inner soul. Second was a willing vulnerability as a form of moral courage. Third was ambiguity as a state of learning and resisting. Not knowing is not something that men like to say ever. We always like to be the ones who know, and if we don't know, we'll mansplain, right? We will try to fill in the space by saying we do know often. Fourth is the need for examples, to have a standard for the new masculinity. Who and where are we going to find these examples? Fifth was authenticity, to be true to one's self in alignment with the creator and in all our relations. To seek our true self, to weed out those things that are not authentic, the whiteness, the patriarchy. Six is practicing sacred spiritual relationships in shoulder-to-shoulder service with women and others. I was just going to quickly, because the time is getting short, I would just look at three of those. First one is vulnerability. And I love these two quotes, one from Madeleine Delingle. When we were children, we used to think that when we were grown up, we would no longer be vulnerable. But to grow up is to accept vulnerability. To be alive is to be vulnerable. And then Brene Brown, who is kind of the queen of vulnerability, amazing work that she's done in research on shame and vulnerability, is I define vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. To be human is to be in vulnerability. And then the other one is the need for a standard, touchstone, a moral compass, an example to follow. And for the men in this study, just guess who came up was Abdul Baha, who is one of the center of the covenant in the Baha'i faith, who came to the United States and Canada in 1912, and who spoke at one of the first NAACP meetings, who spoke to women's suffrage groups. It was an incredible example for the Baha'is at that time of the importance of these principles of equality of men and women and the equality of the races. And then the last one is sacred relationship in a spirit of service to humanity. And that the idea of working together with women and others being a way for us to work our way out of this toxic masculinity into new forms of more feminist masculinity. Okay, so Yacine, are we on time?
Yes, right on time. I just stopped.
Good. I was trying hard. I hope I didn't go too fast for everybody. I have some questions that I can pop up, but what I think what I'll do here is stop sharing so we can see everybody. Hello, nice to see you again. Hello, and that was a really fast version of the presentation. So I'm sorry it went so fast, but if you have questions right off the bat.
Yes, and I'd like to say that I think you did an excellent job at taking us through your work. You say it was fast. I think that was actually, for me at least, a good pace. And the tone of your voice is very calming. So I appreciated that as well. So as Chuck stated, now is the time for anyone to, I don't know, share questions or maybe reflections.
Just a reflection here.
Yes,
thank you, Chuck. Every time this is my third or fourth time to see it, and every time I gain something new. And so keep it up. The other thing I want to tell you, maybe there's another job for you to come back to Winnipeg and have another thing like this for the wives, at least for the wives of these 10 people. Another PhD. Wow. And interview the some of the women and see how they are dealing with their men.
Good idea. We talked about that. We also talked about a men's group. How's that going?
That was great. That was great.
Well, we met once, but we talked about meeting more than once, and of course
Yeah.
I had to leave, so I couldn't keep that up. But the idea of the men continuing to meet did come up.
Chuck, Chuck Egerton, I sent
Yes.
you a chat question, which I won't
Okay.
here. Take a look at it, and if you feel it's
I'll see if I
appropriate,
can find it here.
the answer to that.
Okay. How do Baha'i men reconcile with no women being allowed on the Universal House of Justice? And does this include gay men? What about them? The study itself was really not about sexuality. And I really, in the interviews, some of the men did talk about issues of sexuality. So it wasn't exclusive. And actually, when I showed this exhibit at Guilford College in North Carolina, Quaker College, there was a gay student who was there in the class that was looking at the exhibit. And he actually pointed out that he was glad that sexuality was really not a part of the discussion here, in at least from his perspective. Now, that's not necessarily something that all men might say when they see that exhibit, but it was really not. It was more focusing on male identity and masculinity. The question on the Universal House of Justice, it didn't come up in our study. I have definitely had some deep conversations with other Baha'is about that issue and how we live in that question. I think it's a good question to ask. Have you had discussions with Baha'is about that question?
Many attempts, many attempts.
Many attempts. Okay.
Also,
Okay.
I might tell you I'm a Baha'i myself.
Okay. And I was going to guess at that, but there are many things written, and in my thesis, I address 3 issues. I try to head them off in a sense because I knew that there's criticism towards the Baha'is about only men being on the House of Justice, about kind of the what I would call heteronormativity of the Baha'i faith, that it's really a heterosexual normative, and the gendered language of the Baha'i writings, that the Old English form of the Baha'i writings using God as he and him, when we know in the original Arabic there's no gender, the pronouns are not gendered at all. So I address all 3 of those in my thesis, and I'd be happy to send you those pieces of the thesis or let you look at those things. These are deep questions, the question about the house. Of course, Baha'is know that Baha'u'llah himself established the house as being for the membership of the house being just for men. And that's one of these paradoxes that we deal with in trying to understand why that is so, and yet at the same time, in the same moment, being absolutely in the space of equality of women and men. And so trying to see that as not a statement of inequality. Anyway, I'm not going to go any deeper with that right now, Ray, but be happy to share those portions of my thesis with you if you'd like to see those.
Yes, I would, because
Thanks.
It's something that concerns me very much.
I hear you. I do. Thank you for asking that question.
Yes, thank you for asking that question, Ray.
I see Sarah has her hand up. Is that or Par? Oh, and Hoda does too. But who had their hand up first? Was Sarah probably?
I think so.
Okay, go ahead.
I was just wondering, when you were talking about how you were thinking of doing Photo Sophia again, but this time with a greater concentration on white supremacy and focusing on basically racial prejudices. And you were talking about whiteness when you said it and you were pointing at the paper, but you didn't. I was just wondering if you meant were you thinking about the use of color and paper when you were talking about that? Because I was just thinking about the idea of maybe if you were doing Photo Sophia again, using sepia tones instead of black and white or color, or not making white paper the only option for printing the images of the men, or playing around with that, things like that.
I like how you think, Sarah. You're thinking visually, and I did contemplate one point black and white as opposed to full color images of the portraits. And if you see in my inscription, I included my picture, which was in black and white when I did the test run of Photosophia. So those are good thoughts. Even having the background paper not be white. Those are all important considerations, especially if we're dealing more with the issue of color, and whiteness. Yeah. The other piece of that is if I could see this being extremely valuable for African Americans to go through Photosophia, but I don't know if it would be appropriate for me to do that alone as a white researcher. I think it would be really important that I be either someone else do it or we I'm accompanied together with partners who are African American to do that, because there's always this concern I have of centering myself as the white person, as the white man, and that's definitely an issue I have to be very conscious of in research. Thanks for that question. I hope that answered your question or dealt with it. Let's see, Hoda, are you going to show your face, Hoda?
No, I can't actually. I was in another meeting, and unfortunately I had the phone on all the time, but I didn't want to miss anything. But unfortunately, I did. I've known you for the past 30 years, and I must say, your audacity, your courage, your fortitude, and your tenacity in addressing the most vital and challenging issue in this theme is most refreshing, most attractive, and hopefully you'll set fire in the hearts of many other men who are so restricted and restrain themselves from being able to engage and internalize their female side, the female qualities. I just wanted to ask you regarding white fragility, which is a very which shows itself in dismissiveness, in anger, fear, guilt, leaving the scene and being silent. What would you say is there a male? There's white tears, white women's tears. It's very specific to that. Is there, if you were to say from your experiences and being engaged in a lot of these workshops, how does white fragility manifest?
You're breaking up a little bit, Hoda, but I think I heard the question. You're asking how things are manifested in terms of basically a transference from white fragility to male fragility. And I think there's so many parallels there. I was just working on a list today. It's just so much more than I could possibly put in this presentation. But it's actually a list of the culture of white supremacy. And it lists things like, what you're talking about, the idea of kind of individuality. Also the idea of walking away, trying to avoid the denial. There's so many parallels that are exactly the same, I think, between dealing with male supremacy and white supremacy. And really, when you think about white supremacy, it was men that set up white supremacy, men that created it. I mean, women have been involved and have definitely helped it along and have facilitated it and enabled men to do it. But it was really as far as my history, as far as I understand it, it really was men that created it. And so the way that patriarchy and whiteness are woven together, they're almost inseparable. I think that many of the ways that men react, I mean, the one emotion that men seem to be comfortable expressing is anger rather than tears. So I think what you could see in these situations where, say, a woman might show white fragility through tears, the man will more likely show it through anger, and kind of defensive anger. So I'm looking at my text from, but anyway, I think it's a really good question, and I'm working on a couple of project ideas. One might end up being a class at the Wilmette Institute dealing with whiteness and patriarchy, which would really give the time to really look into the parallels here between the two. And what I'm really concerned about, particularly as a Baha'i, and this was a focus on Baha'i men, is how is white supremacy and male supremacy manifest in the Baha'i community, in our institutions, in the way that we behave with each other, in our community life. Are we really, there seems to be a big concern now about race, but are we looking at gender enough? Because the world will not find world peace just by solving the racial issues. Gender equality is absolutely a prerequisite for world peace as well. So that's why I think it's kind of good to work with them in parallel if we can.
Thanks, Chuck. Thank you.
Thank you, Hoda. Thank you for that question.
So we still have a few more minutes. So I encourage you, if you have questions, to ask them or comments, or maybe if you have a story that connects to what you've heard that you would like to share, please.
Is it Craig? Have your hand up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Because the word that really stuck out to me in the presentation was ambiguity.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that, I grew up in the Midwest amongst a lot of staunch males where there were very defined gender roles, and to succeed, you slotted yourself into that archetype. And if you didn't, you failed. And so on the other side of the equation, if you want to call it, like in the woke world, there's sort of a paradigm of evil that's levied against that sort of John Wayne toxic masculinity. And the thing that ambiguity tells me is that we're in a transition period where our ability to give ourselves permission to move to a place that makes sense for a new day, we need to be able to do it from an authentic standpoint versus just from a standpoint of shame. So we just need to get there as fast as we can so we can virtue signal and take that burden of shame and guilt off our shoulders. But if we don't go through the process of doing it internally all the way through, it's just a mask. So I feel like there's masks of jumping to the conclusion, just like there are masks of the hereditary masculinity. That was
No, that's a really good point, Craig. I think these processes for me to leaving whiteness, okay, just to talk about that is a life work.
Yep.
I'm never going to complete it. It doesn't really matter necessarily how long I've been on the journey. It's never going to be complete because that's how deep seated it is in me. I think with masculinity and a lot of these issues, they are also equally deep-seated, and there has to be a patience. Now, I don't think we should, we're not asking women to be more patient with us. I guess in a way we are, but really we should have been working on this a long time ago to get to be in a place where there's more progress right now. But it isn't something, as you said, that you can just tear off. There's a weeding out, and then there's a cultivation process that has to go on. And the thing is, these weeds are planted among the flowers, and we have to very carefully pull these weeds out because there are good qualities that we have as men and as white people that we're not just going to tear it all down, burn it all down, and then start with something new. So there's a cultivating process, at least that I understand in this work, and the way, from Baha'i perspectives and what some of the writings tell us, it's going to take generations and generations, but we have to start. And I think the ambiguity piece and the vulnerability piece is so important for us to be open to take risk as men, be willing to speak out, to listen to women. I think a big issue here, And I've recently had some consults with young women who have been having issues of sexism within the Baha'i community, and just trying to learn from them to hear what's going on, and the difficulty is there's a lot of gaslighting that goes on. Basically, oh no, you're crazy. There's no sexism here. What are you talking about? There must be something wrong with you. You should be more devoted to your faith. That kind of stuff. So I think as men, we have to be very conscious, super conscious of how we treat, as white men particularly, how we treat women, listening carefully. We're gonna fall off the wagon. We're gonna fall into pitfalls all the time. I've recently fallen into some big ones. It's not something that's easy. And I have had to learn some extreme patience in trying to work this through for myself, and it hurts. It's painful. It's uncomfortable, and we talk about that a lot with whites in race. It's uncomfortable for us to work through these things. I think in a lot of ways it's similar with dealing with gender and male supremacy too. They're very parallel in that way.
Thank you for this.
Thanks for that question. Yeah. I know Yacine has to leave at 8:30. I'm willing to stay a little longer if anyone wants to chat longer. We'll have maybe an after chat for those that might want to hang out to talk some more. But are there any more questions right now? I see Hoda has her hand up again, or did you not take it down?
No, actually, I do have another question if nobody else has a question. Last
Okay.
night, we were in a conversation. It was a very safe space. There was actually more white men on the call than I've ever seen. It's because on a lot of these Zoom calls, there's more, by far more women present in the conversation than there are men. So anyway, and one of the men, towards the end when we were just chatting, said, I'm afraid. I too am afraid, because we're talking about doing this anti-racism work. And my question is, from your research, what do white men fear most?
Well, in the research, it says it's the fear of femininity. I mean, I'm talking about in terms of gender more, but fear of femininity is really big in terms of gender. Now, in terms of race, I think I think we're afraid of vulnerability. We're afraid to realize that we are imperfect and that we're wrong. So many times that we don't have a perspective on something. There's such an urgency for us to be right. I mean, it's the old joke that men don't ask for directions, right? It's because we want to be right. We don't want to ever appear to be vulnerable. We're the sturdy oak that everyone can rely upon. And one of the things about maleness is that, we're talking about white men in particular here, but all men of all ethnicities and colors suffer from patriarchy. This is not just something that white men suffer from. I don't mean to give the idea that it's just white men. We may have more complicated issues, but in other communities of color, there are real issues also with patriarchy that will have to be addressed, and it's very delicate how that could go about. I mean, the Persian community, Sohail, talk about masculinity and things there. All the things that go on, and some of our discussions on race, we've gone into talking about the dominance of the Persian male in some of these in institutions and in different spaces, and the deference that is held towards the Persian doctor. And that just to be aware of these things, and they cross cultures, they're expressed differently in each culture, and it's probably better for those in that culture to help address it in that particular culture than for some outsider like me, to be casting aspersions about it. But this is a across the board, patriarchy in particular is across the board. But I don't know if I'm answering your question, Hoda, about fear. Maybe some other people have ideas here on what is it that we truly fear. I think
Maybe I
we
can
fear.
or
Go ahead. Oh, you have to go. Okay, Yacine. Thank you so much, Yacine. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
you're
Give
welcome.
everybody,
You're
give
welcome.
Yacine. Okay. Thank you. I'll
Thank
talk
you,
to you
everyone.
tomorrow. Okay.
I'm sorry I
Okay.
can't stay for much longer. I do have another
Okay.
obligation. It was a pleasure to share this space and time with you. I look forward to next time. So have a good evening.
Thank you so much, Yacine. Thank you. I love working with you. Yeah. So if I don't know if there was a question, and something else we didn't really say about Yacine is French. He's a French citizen. He grew up in Paris, but his family is from North Africa. He's North African origins. It's interesting. Yeah. So was there anybody else who wanted to chime in on this question of what is it that white men fear about dealing with race?
I think they fear ostracism and expulsion from the tribe, from their fellow whites.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you caught in that couple of quotes that I gave about being a traitor to whiteness is being loyal to humanity, right? And yesterday I was telling Sohail that his wife Carol gave a wonderful presentation in the Durham meeting on Zoom, and she talked about being white bad people. To be a bad white person meant that you were resisting whiteness. If you're a good white person, you're passive and you're just going along. So resisting is seen by your peers and seen by the tribe as bad, right? You're not going along, you're breaking rank, right? You're making us look bad. But I think you're absolutely right on that there's a fear. One of the things about whiteness is we have such a love affair with whiteness that we are afraid if we leave it that we'll be alone. Who will we have then? And honestly, for me, Craig, that's been some incredible relationships with African American friends for me. And I don't deserve the friendships, but they have emerged as I stepped away from whiteness and continue to step away from it. And I think that is probably would happen with any white person who chooses to step away from whiteness, that those relationships will find you because you have decided to be a traitor to the lies of whiteness. Just my thought. Yeah. Thanks.
This is Judy with Dean up here.
Hi, Judy.
Hi. I may be speaking out of turn by saying what I think white men are most afraid of, because I'm not a white man. But
Go ahead.
I think it's very obvious, and it's so obvious it goes without saying. I think white men are afraid of losing power. That's what it's all about. They've been in power. White men have been in power for centuries and eons, and or whatever. And I think it's that. It's like if you've had all this power and you've been able to control women and other races and control the economy and control governments, well, of course you're afraid. As my husband Dean just said, you feel like the rug's being pulled out from under you when you think about giving up that power. So
well, thank you,
what I think anyway.
And thank you for bursting the bubble here and just telling the truth, because the answer to that for so many white men is what power do I have? What, like you hear with white privilege, well, what privilege do I have? These the kind of denial, the pushing it aside and not accepting the power. And I think that's what you said is right on. Supremacy is power. Bell Hooks talks about the imperialism of white supremacy. And I, for a while I didn't understand what she meant by imperialism. And it's an encroachment. It's a constant grabbing. The imperialistic, a country that's imperialistic is going out and finding new territory all the time. It's constantly grabbing and pulling and owning more and more. And I think that's true about whiteness and white supremacy and white power, is it's insatiable. It's continually trying to grab more and more power. And, this is, when I talked about trying not to center myself as a white man, I think that that's really what it's about, because white men, we're accustomed to be in the center. We're accustomed to being in power. We're accustomed to being listened to. I mean, it's that's our experience. I can walk in. I left a reading a group that I was part of that was all women except for me, and I would listen in from the other room because my wife was on the call, and the group really changed when I left. Just my presence as a man there, I could just hear the tones, and it's not like they wouldn't have invited me back, but I haven't gone back because I could tell that they were better off without me there, even though I wasn't trying to do anything. My presence. Christian has his hand up. You're muted. There you go.
Okay, hi. I wanted to weigh in on the fear. I think fear of losing power, but what happens when you lose power? Payback.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just like indigenous, what happens when you lose your property rights? And who's going to own your house?
Right.
Where are you going to go?
Right.
I think it's a very basic fear of dying. Quite an inheritance to be white.
Yeah. Well, and there is that fear. I appreciate that, Christian, very much. I remember going to a party that was right around the time when Obama was elected the first time, and it was out in the country, and it was all white people, and there was a neighbor there who said, if Obama's elected, you better get your guns and lock up your women, because there's going to be payback, is what he was fearful of if basically whites lost the White House and the power of the White House. And that was really very telling to me, about what whites fear about losing power. Yeah. Jim has his hand up.
Hi, Chuck. I was just listening, and your last fellow there, Christian, he was saying that, and I think the thing is that the men are afraid to go forward because of those things that he was saying, like the trust. You can't trust other people, so why relinquish something that you've bonded into a trust form, right? So nobody has a vision of what they're going to go to, because society's been built a certain way. And then people come along and tell us about these new ideas about, equality and getting rid of these prejudices and stuff that society is structured on. And people don't see a new society coming forth because of their insecurities. So, like, because you're a Baha'i, I feel that you started the structuring of your paper because you do have a vision for a place for everybody to go. And the commonality of that information, of that new sort of idea of a society where people can grasp onto something, and each individual knows what it is, and then they can have that gut level response to each other, and then develop this mutual reality together that isn't dependent on all these fears, because society right now is all driven by fear. You're afraid to run out of money, you're afraid of this, your insurance, a million things, And like you were just saying about the guns and, lock up this and that, people just play on that constantly. All the shows on television are all about, you know, insurrections and, violence and everything else. So if you have a philosophy that becomes enacted as a reality, then that's the reality that we can all have confidence in. And that's one of the reasons I'm a Baha'i. And that's the thing that I see in it, because there's this purpose to it, because we have to get over this absolute fear that we run around with all our lives. Anyways, I'll just keep going, so I better be quiet.
No, Jim, that's a good point. I think I can't remember, it was maybe Craig talking about that, ultimately, or I can't remember who said it, but Christian may have said it about it's a fear of death, ultimately. These all have deep moral and spiritual implications. These forces that are working on us and that we're trying to resist, and we're trying to build a new consciousness, a new way of looking at the world, new cultures of peace. It requires unlearning as well as learning. It requires us to really take away things and resist things, pretty strongly resist stuff, and to try to build and acquire new qualities that are not going to perpetuate these things. It's like the statement that you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. And some of you may have heard that quote before, but we can't use in our resistance, we can't use the same tools that racism and white supremacy and male supremacy uses. Mark, I see your hand, but we have another Mark whose hand is up, and then we'll get back to you.
Joan Saxton is raising her hand.
Okay, I didn't see Joan. I know who was first. Joan, were you first? Go ahead, Joan. Okay, I'm sorry.
Hi, Chuck. We miss you
Hi.
in Winnipeg.
Miss you too.
Yes. I just want my experience. I have seen situations where females have becoming the boss, and it seems like they have to follow what the men do, and you know what? They follow. They don't. Their experience is not good, and they follow their bosses. They're not good bosses. Do you know what I mean? And I've seen many of the females who lose their jobs, and so for us as women, we have to know that we are different than men, right? And it's okay to be a boss, and I'm a female, and my situation might be different.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. I think we're locked in an embrace, men and women, and literally, and what one of us does affects the other. And men have dominated, and for women to succeed, they've often had to take on the qualities of men, or tried to take on those qualities, because men have dominated and control the circles of power. So you're right, and it's like women often say voting the same way their husbands voted, just kind of deferring to whatever choice their husband made. And part of this is about the training and the raising of children with independence, and equality, that it's going to take generations, I think, to eliminate some of that enabling that happens, in terms of women enabling these toxic masculinities. But thanks for that question. I see Mark Karen is here. Good to see you tonight, Mark.
Hey,
and
how are you?
Good. And Sohail, I saw your hand is up too.
Yeah, I'll call you Dr. Egerton. For those who don't know, he actually was a professor of mine. I'm a master's student in Peace and Conflict Studies department at UNCG. But I just wanted to point out, I appreciate the quote you put up from Elise Boulding about cultures of peace. And I think culture plays such a big role in what we believe and what we know to be true. You made a comment early on in the presentation or maybe before you even get started in the presentation, that we aren't born racist, or we aren't born with racist thoughts, or but in actuality, we are born into racism because of our culture and because of our culture's because our culture plays such a role in who we are and how we develop our own thoughts and how we develop the images and the symbols that we come to know to be true. So I just wanted to make that comment, especially since for me, my research study as a master's student has kind of focused on peace education as a way to change society and to build a culture of peace through storytelling and dialogue. And I think one way to be able to do away with, or address at least, and start to change the way men think in masculinity and white supremacy and superiority, is to have those conversations and to build that culture of peace, and to kind of change our cultures away from those toxic thoughts and those ideas and those ways of knowing that we've become so accustomed to towards equality and recognition of our differences.
Oh, good. Those are good points. Good points, Mark. And my thesis, there were 10 stories in there. One of them is about Abbas, and one of them is about Jim, taken from their interviews and kind of woven together. So I do definitely believe, and I think the art of storytelling is so important in helping us understand these issues and to move away, away from whiteness, away from male supremacy, having stories. And that's one of the answers to finding examples, of what should I be like? How should I be as I move away? So Hale, you had your hand up, please.
Yes, I think the issue of male supremacy is very similar to the issue of race, in that there is a suffering from an inherent feeling of superiority. So there's really I think there's no difference between those two. However, the male supremacy is a heck of a lot worse, because it has longer periods that people have had it, and it covers the entire world, whether you are in Africa or America or anywhere else. And in some countries is extremely elaborated. And I have to admit, US and some of the Western countries are in a whole lot better shape when it comes to this particular matter. Not that we have got control over it or anything like that, but we're talking about, especially, you're talking about Persians. It's in our blood to want to be superior. And to want to dictate and to want to rule, and so it's a very challenging issue. And I know that, having lived in this country myself as a Persian male, of course, I came here when I was 18, so I didn't have a lot of the bad habits yet, but I still had a lot of bad habits. And having lived in this country, it's helped me a whole lot. Not that I'm, okay yet, but it has helped a lot because of what I've seen in this country, the way women are treated in this country relatively to other countries. It's a whole lot better. So just wanted to say that.
It's a good point, Sohail. I remember having a debate, just a good discussion with a Pakistani fellow student in the Peace and Conflict Studies program. And it was before I had really decided on the topic of my thesis. I knew I would use photography, and I was thinking I might use race as the topic. And we had this discussion, which is the most difficult problem in the world, racism or sexism? And he said without hesitation, oh, sexism, being Pakistani, and knowing, the life in Pakistan. And thinking, as you were saying, about the worldwide scope of, I mean, racism is worldwide too. Anti-Blackness is definitely a worldwide phenomenon. But I think, really looking at the issues of male superiority and patriarchy it's super deep. And Bell Hooks even mentions, she said that in the whole world, the biggest problem is sexism. Bell Hooks identifies it, but she says only in America is anti-Blackness a bigger problem. Is race the bigger problem than sexism? So it's very interesting to hear her perspective on that. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, and also bringing up that it is better, but the standard is high. We are to be distinctive. There's a desire for us to be distinctive, and the standard is extremely high. The supreme effort that's required for us is quite high, and but I appreciate what you said. Were there some other hands or questions? Oh yes, Mark. I'm sorry. See you there. Go ahead. You're still there.
Hello.
You go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes, I can hear you, Mark.
Oh, okay. Well, there's been a lot of talk about fear and fear on the part of men and white people, and I would like to suggest something else, at least from my perspective, is apathy. Fear is for people who feel as if they have something to lose. In terms of the status quo as such, I don't think it's really done much for me except grind me down and offer me diminishing returns, no matter how hard I worked. But the flip side of that is it's very easy for me as a white guy, as a straight white guy, to just go, okay, I don't care. I mean, I burn the damn thing down. I don't care. But it's what you do have as a straight white guy is you have what I like to call the power of invisibility. We talk a lot about white men being the ones who want to be heard, who want to be the center of everything. Well, guess what else we can do? We can blend into the background and just go completely unnoticed. We can, I can move throughout my day and nobody even knows I'm there because I'm just another white dude. Nobody's going to question me. Nobody's going to ask, who are you? Why are you here?
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of white people, that's just as, if not more powerful than the fear. It's just, and to me, that's the biggest challenge. It's not over. I don't feel any abiding. I don't feel as if I have anything left to lose by these monumental changes that are taking place. But it is quite easy for me to just take a seat in the back and be lazy and let it all go by and not let other people suffer. So that's my greatest challenge, is to overcome that temptation to just blend into the background and actually be an agent for positive change and go look, I mean, these things, this whiteness and this male dominance has real consequences for real people, and just because it might not be hurting me, that's no excuse for me to take on this cloak of apathy. And I do think I see that not only in myself but in a lot of other white men. I remember having a conversation with some dinner guests my wife and I had over, and the man, the father of the family, said, look, I care about my wife, I care about my kids, and that's about it. I don't care about anybody else. And I'm going, wow, because I saw it's really easy as a white guy to have that attitude.
Yeah. No, those are good points, Mark. And I have to ask, well, what is it that gives us the ability to walk away, to be invisible, to feel that, and not to have to worry about anyone else because my family's taking care of it? What allows us as white men to have that feeling that I have that insulation, that protection? I think that part of what we were talking about too is the numbness. One of the harms of toxic masculinity and I think racism on whites is a numbness, creating a numbness. Like, it just doesn't affect me. I was at the dentist this summer and the hygienist said to me, right after George Floyd. I wish the police just had some device and they could shut off all the phones around them so nobody could take films, and then we'd be okay. You know, I've since changed dentists, and I've had a long discussion with the dentist about that and about having anti-bias training in the dentist office. But and I objected to her statement at the moment. But yeah, that's the idea. It's like if we just didn't see these things, if they were just taken away, you know, from our view, everything would be okay. That's the problem. You know, it's not, and that's we've got. I'm gonna mute them. Okay. But it's it's that numbness, I think, is something that I feel too. And it's part of the conditioning, I think. I mean, I had a friend said that after George Floyd, in her Baha'i community of mostly white people, she sensed a sense of sadness about his death, but not grief. Grief was being expressed by African Americans about it, but for whites, there was just a kind of a sadness about it, right? If you felt anything at all as a white person, right? So it's, you know, and as you're talking about having the ability to only worry about your immediate family, I mean, that is a great place of power and privilege, to be able to have the money or the ability to separate yourself, to have enough guns and enough food stored away, whatever it is, you know, to feel like, you know, you're going to be okay no matter what else happens, and that we're not connected with the rest of the world. You know, that I think that disconnect, that idea of individualism, is a big problem with whiteness and male supremacy too, that we can do it alone. And I think maybe that's what you're getting at a little bit too. Yes, Mr. Sachs.
Hi, Chuck.
Hi.
I think connected to the issue of apathy is also issues of empathy and issues of ignorance. And by ignorance, some people colloquially sometimes will call ignorance stupidity, but ignorance is really a lack of experience, lack of training, but experience. Mm-hmm. And I think part of the white privilege and sometimes the apathy that can go with that, we won't experience the things that people of color will experience. And the more that we can notice that and become part of trying to actually in some way understand what people of color are going through, helps us to gain empathy in that regard. And these two build on each other. You know, the more we rid ourselves of ignorance by experiencing, the more we can take on more empathy to what it's like to be a person of color. And I had a couple of experiences. A few years ago, we drove down to Florida, and our way back, we're at a gas station, big gas station in the middle of the night in Georgia, and it was just about empty. And all of a sudden, police cars are all over the place. And there was a guy pumping gas a couple of aisles over from me. He was a black guy, and he came over to me and he said, "Can I stand beside you?" And it took me a few seconds to know what he was talking about. He wanted to stand beside me because he would be safe standing beside a white guy. And that kind of blew me away, to experience that. So the more we can experience those kind of things, and even if it's just watching TV and listening to black people on TV and understanding what some of the things they're going through, and trying to identify what would that be like if that was me and my family. The more that the apathy will leave us, I think.
Yeah, I think you're making a good point about there's a fear of empathy. I think that's actually because empathy means to feel, right? To actually have feelings for other people and the suffering that they're going through. I don't know if you saw this. My wife showed me one of the fake commercials they do on Saturday Night Live. Was it was a commercial for 5-hour empathy. You know, instead of 5-hour empathy or 5-hour energy, it was a little bottle of 5-hour empathy. Did anybody see that? You should just look it up. Look it up on YouTube. It's hilarious. But you know, it's like they're trying to sell this guy who's complaining about all the things happening in the world. He's a white guy, and they're trying to tell him to take this little bottle of 5-hour empathy, but he won't take it. You know, because he's so afraid of what he'll feel if he actually feels empathy, right? So he ends up jumping out the window instead of taking the 5-hour empathy bottle. But I think that's really that's a great, funny, humorous way to look at it. But there is a fear of actually feeling, and for us as whites, because I think one of the things that I've noticed that's been part of my conditioning is a stripping away of feeling. You know, men are not supposed to feel things so deeply, and it isn't universal, but this has been kind of my European American experience. You know, we're supposed to be kind of level and certain and not kind of up and down on waves of emotion. And you know, so to regain that's part of regaining my humanity. And for me, this has been having cross-racial friendships that have been close friendships where I've learned, and it's helped me to regain many of those you know, what kind of were lost in my humanity, you know, regain my humanity in some ways. A good point on empathy there. Anybody else have a thought? Yes, Chuck.
I've been thinking about apathy and empathy and how dynamically opposed they are to each other. Yeah. And how, and also the fear question that was brought up earlier. It's been running through my head all along. And I'm seeing, and I'm just sort of sharing thoughts as they've come to me. I really don't have any conclusions yet to share, but you know, I'm seeing apathy as a way of hiding. You know, as long as I'm invisible and in the background here, hopefully I won't get hurt. It won't hurt me or my family or the people I care about, like you were saying, that other person saying about their guest was saying. You know, I'm seeing a lot of the fear of change allowing myself to be more vulnerable as a male and allowing myself to be more vulnerable as a white. The fear of the change being, I don't know what we're changing to. You know, show me what we're moving to, and maybe I can support it. You know, is kind of, I think, the white male ego place. So, you know, if I'm apathetic and stay in the background and just watch enough, maybe I'll see something that I can support and move into. And then you see things like you know, the racial violence that we see on the news, and you know, Black people being murdered, and that's a new word, I think, for white people to say, as far as Black people are concerned, murdered as opposed to killed.
Much more descriptive.
Yeah.
Of the reality. Yeah.
And you know, if you're looking at it as murder, and then you see it as the possibility of happening to someone that you know, to you, then it takes on more meaning, and you feel a little bit more encouraged to maybe lean out of the shadows a little bit, you know, and try to get woke a little bit, to understand what's going on and hopefully be able to do something about. Again, I'm just sharing thoughts here.
Yeah, no, those are excellent thoughts, Chuck. I think, moving into vulnerability is moving into ambiguity, right? We don't really know what's going to happen to become more vulnerable as men. But I think we know that that's the direction we need to move in, and there has to be a trust. I think it kind of depends on your belief system, and I don't think everyone on here are Baha'is, but I think for those who are Baha'is, there is definite guidance and assistance, to help with feeling that it's okay to take those risks, and to look for models, say in Abdul Baha, in what he did during his lifetime, that in ways also how he expressed his masculinity. And one of the things that he said that the future will be less masculine and more feminine. And the guidance of that's a very fearful statement for a lot of men, to think, how am I going to become more feminine? What does that mean? Because one of our biggest fears is the fear of femininity and homophobia. So I think it's important to kind of look at whatever examples we can find to help us and become examples for each other and for those around us, to say, yes, we can move from these locked in modes of how men are supposed to be into something new, and create a new identity, for men, that isn't necessarily, it's not becoming women, but it's not being the way men have been trained to be today. Because what is it going to take? What kind of men are going to be needed to build peace in the world? That part of that reading on Cultures of Peace described a world where there's mutuality, where there's understanding and consultation, where people are living on an equal basis. So whatever qualities don't facilitate that are going to have to go away. They're going to have to be removed, and we're going to have to develop qualities that are going to facilitate the ability for us to be working together mutually, to talk honestly, to hear each other really clearly, to really be able to listen, and to see, the evidence of gaslighting happening within communities, and to call out for us as men, to call it out when we see it in the best way that we can. Without necessarily a lot of shaming, but probably one of the best things that men can do is when they see women who are being treated that way, is just like it is for whites, when they're seeing a Black person or person of color being treated badly, is to step in as in whatever way you can, not take over, but just to acknowledge this is wrong. There's something wrong going on here, and there has to be another way to deal with it. And I don't see very many men doing that. I can't say, and I'm not putting myself up as an example to say I've done that a lot either, but that is being a traitor. That's truly being a traitor to toxic masculinity, to step out like that and say, wait a second, I've seen what's happening right here is wrong. You are gaslighting these women. You are not treating these women or listening to what they're actually saying. So there's a lot to be done, but I think stepping into vulnerability, being willing to accept ambiguity, which is really the beginning of learning, is to say, I don't know. That's where we start learning, is when we say, I don't know. I'm an empty cup, fill me up, let me begin to learn. I think there's a lot to be said about taking on those qualities. And then the other part is working with other people. I see Hoda has had her hand up. You're very patient, Hoda. And then
I am
see
so glad I can ask another question. I am so grateful. All the gentlemen on this line have offered so many answers to burning questions in my heart. I actually just also happened to ask my husband, an Iranian man, why don't you speak up? You know all this. You're just as passionate as I am. Why aren't you in the ring? And he said, Hoda, I want to be very honest with you. He said, this is psychological war. This is war against a mindset that has been going on for 450 years. And he said, who would want to be engaged in war, get bloodied, get battled? if they know they're not going to win. Men want to win. They want to be winners. It's competition.
Yeah.
And you know, and the irony is when you think of war and serried lines and the soldiers are under attack and the double crusade and the three weapons and all the war analogies, I can't help but think, you think pictures of men come in your mind. But I see women in large numbers in lockstep doing this race work. I don't want to make any comparisons, but I thought I kind of wanted to bring that up. It's just how men are wired to be winners, to be the alpha male, the top dog. And if they're not going to be able to win this war, they don't want to engage. They don't want to be losers.
Yeah, so that's such a good point. You know, really the men in the study, a lot of them talked about competition, even having to give up sports because they got too aggressive. You know, there's an aggressive side to men that's very powerful and scary and dangerous and can be violent, right? You know, that if it's not held in check. So there is that problem and that fear. You know, I appreciate you bringing those things up. The competition. You know, competition is okay in moderation, right? It's okay, but you know, we have to, you know, I told I see Ehsan, is that your name, Ehsan? Okay, I'll get to you next, and I see Sarah. There's a story, and I told it yesterday. I was reading in The Fire Next Time. James Baldwin was at the home of Elijah Muhammad, the head of the Black Muslims, the Nation of Islam. And he was there for dinner, and he had been invited for dinner, and they were really trying to convert him, James Baldwin, into the Nation of Islam. This was in the 60s. And Elijah Muhammad was talking about the white devil and how terrible white people were, which is the doctrine of the church of Nation of Islam. And James Baldwin is talking about what's going on in his head at the time, and he's saying, "But wait, I have good white friends, some of them that would actually die for me." Right? And he was about to bring it up to Elijah Muhammad, but then he realized there were maybe 2 white people that he knew that would die for him. Like 2, and he realized these are just exceptions. Most white people would not give him the time of day or care about him at all. And so basically that was Elijah Muhammad's argument, that white people are the devil, right? And so he didn't bring it up, but it made me think about how important it is for us to show distinction, and for all of us, all men, and particularly in this group of Baha'i men, to show distinction in this area, to be exceptions, really, to be willing to die for our friends, to be willing to be that vulnerable, to give up everything for our friendships and our relationships with our friends of color, and for women too. So anyway, Ehsan, please.
Excuse me, Chuck. I think
Yes.
Sarah has had her hand up for a long time.
Okay, thank you, Sohail. I'm not seeing everything. If you don't mind waiting for a minute, Sarah, please go ahead.
It's okay. I can go after Ehsan. I don't mind. Thank you, though, Sohail.
Okay.
No, please go ahead. Please go ahead. You were first. Thank you.
Okay. I guess as everyone's talking about invisibility, of like how white men have like this sense of invisibility, or this sense of apathy, or this sense of fear of losing power, or even us talking about like the need for men, especially white men, to be showing distinction to be the exception amongst others. I think, like, maybe it goes without saying, but maybe it's understood, but I think it's still important to just state that men and white men have that choice, and that I think is the privilege. So that's the thing. You have the choice to be invisible. You have the choice to wait and see what happens before you make your move to be an activist of some kind. You have the choice to not be friends with people who are maybe agitating for change and are people of color or are women. You know, that's a choice. And I think that's what the privilege is. You have the choice to not be involved or to be involved. And that's that's the struggle, that's the unfairness, that's the injustice for everyone else who doesn't have the choice. They have to fight for themselves or buy into the hegemonic structure of society and just give up. So I just think that's something that maybe needed to be pointed out.
That's a good, I think, a good point, Sarah, that the idea of choice is privilege. I mean, the choice to insulate yourself. You know, there are so many. I mean, there are issues of not just race and gender, but also class that make others much more vulnerable to just the forces of life, and also just living in such a racist society as ours. You know, the being constantly under siege. You know, the idea of being under siege or under attack. You know, when I was in Canada. Dawn, my wife, would not walk outside at night in our neighborhood. You know, I would take walks. We would take walks together at night, or and I would walk by myself without a second thought of walking out. But she would never do it because of her vulnerability as a woman and her fear that something could happen as a woman out there. And that was a definite privilege for me to be able to walk like that. You know, I think to be conscious as men of where our privilege lies and that we have choices that women don't have, that people of color don't have, is really important as maybe a first recognition of the stature we have in the world as men, and in particular as white men or men who are not Black. Yeah, it's a really good point, Sarah. So, Hassan, sorry, thank you for waiting.
No, thank you. Thank you. Excellent discussion. I apologize, I was a little late. So many great points have been shared, so many. One of them that stood out and hit me was this point of this aspect of competition, and that yes, I think it's almost innate, inherent, you know, from the earliest days. Males are bred, and in a sense, to have that ideology of superiority, as well as to dominate and to be the winners, and not even have the losers. Who cares about them? It is and often losers are categorized as, you know, females. You're a girl, you know, girls are the losers. And this is in schools, this is normalcy. And so this, I've seen it growing up in the schools. Now I have kids, and it's there. It's used. So this aspect, when Hoda mentioned this aspect of competition, why do people are apathetic to this monstrous task? Monstrous. You know, the Guardian uses the word Herculean. There's another term, Aegean. You know, these type of tasks. That's so enormous to go after racism. How there's so many great philosophers that said it's impossible, impossible. But if you do not go after it, it ain't going to be. Nothing's going to change. And the change first has to happen with us. If we do not change, that's why we first have to change ourselves. And then the other point that I believe it was Sarah mentioned, and even prior to her, there was another dear soul that mentioned, is that this aspect of male that we have with women. I see this as one of the biggest obstacles is males are poor listeners. We're just, it's so true. Yes. Because we value our own opinion over women. We think. And so whenever a woman is talking, we're not thinking about what they're saying. And I'm not saying I don't know if I'm speaking for myself or all of male, you know, but what I'm saying is often we are just poor listeners. We want it quick, get to the point. And so women sometimes are very verbose. They know they might get 4,000 words out. And men just want quick commercial snapshot answer. And this sometimes frustrates men, and we ignore. Our perfect exemplar, Abdul Baha, how he was. He didn't see color or race. He looked at the heart. And that is the attitude. If we look at the heart, we become true lovers of humanity. True lovers of humanity see the heart. That is the love that should dominate us. And when we have that type of love, everything else becomes irrelevant because we love that person. That's all I have to say. I really enjoying you, Chuck. Really, what a pleasure to see you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. Yeah, I think we had mentioned that the men in the study. We talked about my doctoral study earlier. The 10 men in the study, really, almost all of them came up with Abdul Baha as the example. And the question about him is, what kind of gender expression, what kind of masculinity did he express in his life? And looking, just going back and looking at his life, and just in those terms, how did he deal with men and women? How did he show displeasure? How did he show if he needed to show anger? All of these things are really important because he was, for us as Baha'i, Baha'i is the example of how we could be. And I think it's really important if we can go back to that. And I honestly, Ehsan, I do think Abdul Baha saw color. I don't think the answer was to be colorblind, and I think he very clearly noted in many ways, in many of the examples of what he did, that it is okay to notice color, and it is okay to notice gender difference. I think, who of us can't look at a woman and say, I'm not looking at a woman? I mean, it's obvious that we know that there's a difference between us, and it's not letting that make the situation unequal. It's using it as or seeing it as a way to possibly enhance our relationship. But we talk a lot about cross-racial relationships and a kind of spiritual intimacy, where whites and blacks or Persians and blacks can talk about the issues of race very intimately. I think those same kinds of platonic, intimate spiritual relationships need to exist between men and women. It's sometimes you may say, well, that can happen with my wife or whatever. I think that's true. And obviously my wife is one of my greatest teachers about masculinity. There's no doubt about that. But I do think relationships with others where it's a relationship where you can say, please call me out when I do something stupid. Please call me out. Let me know if I do something, that's just really patronizing. Or if I say something that sounds like gaslighting, or I'm disrespecting what you're thinking or what you're saying, call me out if I'm not listening. And that's the kind of relationships we need as men. But in relationships where, there's a love there also. There's a caring. It's not done, brutally. It's not done in an argument. But it's, if we as men ask women that we know that we're close to, will you please do that for me? I wonder what would happen. Mark, you had your hand up.
Okay. Yeah. You mentioned competition and fierce competition. I do agree with you that is typically a male thing, and it can be toxic. I think we need to be careful running it down too much, though, because two of the most fiercely competitive people I've ever known were women, and women of small stature. First of which is my older daughter. She's always been competitive academically in sports. When she was a young teenager, she was in go-kart racing, and I thought it was really cool to watch. And one time she invited me to participate in a fun run around the track in the go-karts with her. And, you know, here I'm thinking, well, I'm a big, strong man, blah, blah, blah. I had no idea how frightening and brutally physical the G forces, the way your body's getting slammed around in those things. It was scary, you know. And here's my little, you know, 80 at the time, 85-pound teenager, you know, who since matured into a 95-pound grown woman. And the other fiercely competitive woman I know is my immediate supervisor at work. I work a fairly vigorously physical, rugged blue collar job, and our immediate supervisor is a woman who for years was actually a boxer. So yeah, I mean, you want to talk about someone who's rough and ready and competitive. And bringing this back around, we've also taught. So let's not always think that competition is a bad thing, and let's not always think that apathy is a bad thing either. Because I just realized, you know, I have this problem with apathy. Well, I know a way I can channel that in a positive manner, is because this new guy that came onto our crew, you know, I've tried to explain to him, you know, our supervisor, she wants things done a certain way. She wants you to follow her to the letter, do what she asks. And he was all like, rah, 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 I don't have to listen to her. And I think what I can demonstrate to him is that I don't care what he thinks. I'm going to follow her. I'm going to respect her leadership. I'm going to do what she asks and be respectful of her, and let him know, channel my apathy in a positive manner, that I really don't care what you think. And, you know, maybe he's expecting me to be the other guy joining him, and, well, let's not listen to this woman. And, you know, no, you know, and so it just sometimes negative attributes can be used in a positive way.
No, I think, and, you know, I'm glad that you brought up the points about competitive women. I think it's about moderation, and it's kind of like, what is the goal of the competition too? I think, you know, sometimes it can be so severe, the way men go about it. You know, I think, you know, it can be dangerous, and I think, you know, when I think about men and violence, and, you know, when we know as men, and this is something we don't often think about and talk about, is, you know, the prisons are full of men. Most crimes are committed by men. Most violence is committed by men, you know, and not the men maybe on this call, but this is something we need to think about as men. Why is that so? You know, and, you know, of course, addressing the issue too, that our prisons are full of Black men as well, unjustly many times. But, you know, why is it that men have tended to be the most violent? Not that women aren't violent. There is violence from women too. but you know, what is it? And is that one extreme representation of competition? The other thing I was thinking about, Mark, as you were talking, is this idea. There's a concept of the racial contract. I don't know if you've ever heard this term used before, but it's in some of the literature. And it talks about how we as whites have a contract with each other that we will not break the chain, right? We will not become traitors to each other. And it's a kind of contract. So when that hygienist said to me about the telephones, you know, wish the police could just, you know, turn off all the telephones, and I disagreed with her, I broke the contract. She didn't know that she was talking with a white person who didn't sign the contract, right? And I think this is so true also about male. There's a male contract. There's an expectation that you're going to be a certain way. You know, I remember getting invited to a Super Bowl party in Canada. And I don't know if I ever told you, Sarah or Jim, but it was a torture for me to sit there. It was a neighbor. I went to the Super Bowl party. I don't watch football at all. It's not something interesting to me, but they quickly realized that I didn't know, you know, I knew the game, but, you know, it wasn't of interest to me. That's a silly example, but there are so many ways that we are expected to fulfill the contract as men, and to step out and say, no, I didn't sign that contract. You know, I believe in equality. I believe in justice. I can't, you know, I'm moving away from these toxic forms of masculinity. That can be a difficult thing to do, to basically tell someone, I'm not in it with you anymore. That can sometimes even be dangerous, you know. Yes, Christian.
I think it's a place of great power for us as white men, that we can challenge those attitudes. I'm a blue collar worker myself and a carpenter, and you made me laugh. I get it. I'm not a hunter. I don't like football either, but I'm a hunter and a fisher.
Okay.
I've got these hunting and fishing. Somebody goes hunting, they come back, I go, how many deer did you catch? You know, or if they go fishing, I say, how many fish did you capture? You know, knowing that it challenges them. It challenges them, and it makes them think, and it puts them on edge. And I think that's a good thing, you know, because then we have to actually talk to each other, you know. And so and as far as competition, you know, the goal of competition, when you're competing with yourself, that's what I learned a long time ago. You compete with yourself, there's no challenge with competition. I mean, we're told to compete with each other, actually, for spiritual distinction. And
right, to vie with
which
one
is
another.
basically competing with you, becoming better every day, you know. But, okay, just a thought.
Yeah. Now those are good points. It made me think too, Christian, as you're talking about that. I mean, I guess I'm always reluctant as a white person to talk about power that I have, but you're right. I think, you know, that, you know, we have maybe it's a responsibility and it's an accountability. It's a form of our accountability, taking account each day, is to address other men when we are in situations like that. There was one of the men in the study, Jean-Michel, told me that he's become more aware of how needy other men can be when they don't know, like he will help people with projects, electrical, plumbing, things in their house, things like that. He will go and help. And he's expressed that he's trying to be more open to the needs of other men, because men will often not ask for help. They won't ask somebody else to assist them. You know, that's part of our pride, part of our individuality. You know, I'd rather go out and buy the log splitter myself, even though my neighbor has one, right? You know, that's sitting there in his yard. I'll go buy, you know, the log splitter. And, you know, so and so he is as a man in this study, and as a Baha'i, is just thinking about having more compassion to other men, of all kinds of men, you know, to just be there for other men. And that came up in our study too. Men talked about how we really become islands. We don't necessarily always have intimate friendship with other men. I mean, talking about spiritual intimacy, you know, like when, you know, your first child is born and your wife has a lot of support from other women, but the man seldom will have that kind of support, right? Remember that, Abbas? We had those discussions in our meeting a little bit. And it's, you know, there aren't the same kinds of support networks emotionally for us, because we're expected to be emotional islands, right? But to have that support network of other men, I think is important in developing our ability to feel, our ability to be more, have more empathy for each other. So that I just wanted to share that was what one man had expressed that he was trying to do, to work on his empathy. Yes.
Mike again, Chuck.
Mike, come on.
I'm really amazed at how coherent the ideas being expressed are tonight from one person to the next. They all seem to amplify one another. Sometimes I watch a lot of maybe way too much news, and I see a lot of the stuff coming from the States about racism. And goodness knows we've got racism in Canada with Indigenous people, but we don't see it quite the same way on the news media. You know, we'll see concerns expressed by Indigenous people about how they're being treated. We see that, but we don't see the, like the footage usually on camera of the police brutality or other racial things that are going on. So anyway, I've thought a lot about this racism in the US. So I've thought about more about that than what I've thought about Canada. But I thought in terms of white privilege, I think one of the things that I see going on right now in the States, I think, is that white males kind of don't know where they fit in anymore. They used to know where they fit in because they had all this privilege. And sure, there's a fair amount of that privilege still residing, but they see it's being eroded. So they don't, and so it's a difficulty knowing how to fit in. And I've never reflected on it before, but I'm thinking about that and all the conversation we had tonight. I'm also thinking about how women are becoming having a much more greater role in the important things of society, and perhaps it's the same way in some regards that some men don't know how they fit in with regard to women anymore. They used to know where it all stood. It was there was a certain way of society doing things, and people understood that. They knew where they fit in, and that was it. But that's all eroding, and so then that results in two other pieces of conversation I heard tonight about. So where do we, as white men, where do we go now? We don't know how we fit in anymore. So where is it we're going to? And so I find this conversation all very interesting, as I say, very, very coherent. So
Well, thank you, Mike. That's a really good question and statement, because in the literature really for the last 20 or 30 years has been discussion of a crisis in masculinity, of men. Kind of the narrative of what we've been told that men are supposed to be is broken, that's changing, and men are kind of at a bit of a loss to know what to do, because really, what are we but the narrative we've been told about it, the story that we have about ourselves, and that gives us our identity. So we need to find new forms of identity for ourselves, and sometimes I find that a lot of it isn't anything like the traditional and ways that men have behaved in our society. I think a lot of times for me it's getting out of the way, as a white man. It's not, definitely presenting my opinion, and sometimes I may do that too much, but knowing when to step out of the way, knowing when to leave the center, because part of whiteness, the concept of whiteness, there is no such thing as a white race. And we talk about all the people that came from Europe, one by one, the Irish, Norwegians, as they came to America, they became white. And then the Africans from all these different countries, as they came to America, they became black. And it was designed as a hierarchical one over the other kind of relationship, and all the laws in the United States about slavery and who had privilege and who had rights and all that. So we have been told who we are as white people and as white men, and we need to break away from that into everything has been made new in this day. Everything is made new, and we need to find what is our place in the world. And I think there's a lot for us to do as white men, and our task is not to, it shouldn't be depressing. I think there's a lot of potential, but we have to talk about it with each other. Like I'm thinking about this discussion tonight. I didn't really know how it would develop, but I'm thinking, this might be a really good kind of ongoing discussion, to have, maybe on a monthly basis or something. So if you like that idea, send me an email, and maybe we could set up there are too many Zooms going on now. But if this is of interest to you and we could invite other men in to talk, I think it could be helpful to do more like that, because we don't have these spaces where we can talk. And, I hesitate to say safe places, because we need to be made vulnerable. Women should be here too. thank you for Sarah being here, and Lindsay is still here, and I think there may be one other woman here too. I think it's important that it not just be men, and that, you know, right now, except Abbas representing the African continent here tonight, you know, we that kind of diversity is important too as we discuss these things. So it's not just a group of white men by ourselves, but there's a lot of value in having these discussions together. So I'm really encouraged by what's kind of developed tonight. It's really warms my heart, you know, to have this kind of conversation. Abbas, you're muted. You're still muted, Abbas. Abbas, you're still muted. Can't hear you. Can't hear you. There you go. Try it. He's got to find the right button.
There's
There
a
you
need
go.
for
Okay.
this kind of discussions. You hear me now?
Oh, yes.
And by the way, you can tell, especially men, they want to know more where we fit. And, you know, the subject of sexism is very important, and the superiority, whatever it is very important. It's, you know, the future has something to do with solving these problems. And discussion like this everywhere, I'm sure there are many discussions on the same topic or around that. That's the way. The only way is education, and learning how to deal with each other to make the future more brighter than what we have now in the streets.
Right. That's right. Yeah, and I think you know, for those of us who have a spiritual perspective, there's a lot of calling on for assistance in this, definitely. Yesterday, when Carol Mansour, Sohail's wife, spoke, she talked about calling on her ancestors, how important it is to call on her ancestors. And she said, you know, they're all waiting there for us to call on them for help. You know, they're waiting for us they're waiting to assist us. And she talked about calling on Louis Gregory and calling on Sadie Oglesby and calling on, you know, many of the, you know, really just stellar, awesome African-American historic Baha'is. But she also said, you know, I call on my own ancestors to ask for help. You know, my folks going way back. And, you know, we as people of European white descent have ancestors that go back, you know, eventually to Africa, right? We all go back there eventually. But we also lived, you know, as very different people in many ages ago in Europe. And our experience, we tend to disconnect ourselves from those ancestors, you know, and so I would just suggest we need to call on our ancestors for assistance here to help us find our way and find our place. And also not hesitate to call on each other, you know, to see, you know, if we have questions or concerns. This is painful. This is difficult. This is super challenging. And, you know, I don't expect women or people of color to have any empathy for me. You know, I mean, if they do, thank God that they do. But I don't expect it. I can't expect that they're going to look on me and say, oh, you know, sorry, poor Chuck. You know, he's got these problems of being white and being a man, you know. You know, it's I think we have to just take our responsibilities and do it, you know, like I do as a Baha'i, to be obedient to the covenant, you know, to be obedient. That's the reason to do these things, not for other people to pat me on the back and say, oh, you're doing really good work as a white man. You know, I can't rely on that. You know? So I think Sarah's ready to head out, and maybe are we ready to kind of close up? Mark, did you have a comment? No. Okay, just waving. Okay. So anybody have any last comments before we close down? Yes.
Thank you very much for the evening.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Thanks for hanging out. Chuck, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just briefly, there have been a couple of things that have kind of been eye openers tonight as far as over the past 6, 8, 9, 10 months, I've been involved in various Zoom meetings concerning racism. You know, I've become more and more aware of the unconscious bias that I had because of the structure of society that we live in. And I became more aware tonight of both the crossover of whiteness and maleness, and also the you know, some of the things that I thought were me. My like you were saying about, or someone was saying about, I'm preparing, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say. I'm not really listening to you. You're talking about the competition between men. You know, when you were talking about the log splitter, you know, I almost reached up and pushed my button and said, "A real man doesn't use a log splitter."
You haven't seen my logs, man. That's all right.
I used to
That's
split
all right.
my own logs, you know, and you know that competition that between you and me, that's funny, that's fun, but
yeah,
there are a lot of people that really think that way, you know.
No, you're absolutely right.
A number of things like that kind of said, yeah, that is a male thing I hadn't really considered before. And oh yeah, I see how now that crosses over into the power and the superiority that we were talking about before.
Does, it really does. I appreciate those comments. Makes me think, I heard a story yesterday too. Some of you know Eric Dozier, who started the One Human Family Choir. Amazing, amazing African-American guy. And a woman went up to him and said, Eric, I'm so happy, as a white woman, I'm so happy to be your ally. And Eric turned to her and he said, you know, I think you got that wrong. You know, racism is a white problem and I'm your ally. You know, and it just made me really think about that. You know, there's a lot of this talk about being an ally. Well, it's true. The problem was started by people that look like us, many of us here on the call, and truly, you know, in terms of women and men of color, women of color, really are out there to be our allies. And I think we need to seek those allies to help us through this kind of navigating who we are and where we should go next. And, you know, just admitting that we don't know is like a really big first step, I think. You know, and, you know, praying about it, reading, trying to get a better understanding, having more conversations like this. That's a big step for us to walk out of what we've been conditioned to be, you know, no matter how we like to split our logs. You know.
Do we need allies for the allies?
That's right. We need allies for the allies. Yeah. Well, I know, let's see, someone just came on. Agnes just came on. I don't know who Agnes is, but welcome. So anyone who needs to sign off, I'll hang around for a few more minutes. Please put your emails in the chat if you want to know about future meetings. I'm really thinking about, you know, Gregory Singfield, who was on earlier. We've been talking about doing like maybe a series, like workshops for men. You know, kind of dealing with things that would be a limited time, you know, kind of thing. So there are possibilities out there of what we can do. And if you leave your email, I'll be sure to let you know what's going on. Also, this recording, if it's not too humongously big, I'll be able to make it available somehow, put it on YouTube or somewhere, so that you can have a look at it or share it with anybody else that you might want to. So if you need to sign off, I'd like to know who Agnes is here. You guys have been great. You've been great. Thank you all so much. Thank you all. Sarah, thanks for hanging in there. Fight the power.
Gotta go work now.
I know. Chuck and Mike, so good to see you. Abbas, thank you all. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all. All right. I will save the chat so that I have it once everybody's typed into it. I can see you're still typing, Chuck. There we go. I got it. Okay. Good. Okay. We're going to work on this together. We're connected now, Chuck. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Bye. Bye, Chuck. Thank you. Good to meet you. Good night. Agnes.
Yes.
Hello. Hello. How you doing? I'm sorry you came in so late.
I was just going through my messages and I was late reading, but I'm glad
That's all
to
right.
be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here. So where are you calling in from?
Georgia.
Georgia. All right.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Yeah, we had a couple people from Georgia tonight. One, my co-facilitator lives in Georgia. I'm in North Carolina.
Who's your co-facilitator?
His name is Yacine Kout. He's are you a Baha'i, Agnes?
Yes.
Her friend. Okay. He's and I am. He's not a Baha'i. And this Common Threads group is Baha'i inspired, but it's not. We aren't really overtly. We don't talk about the faith directly that much, and it's been an interesting group because of that. So I'm gonna stop the recording here.